Hey there, my name's Chris, and welcome back to the property. If you're new, I'm building some stuff. Main thing I want to do right now is get towards building my sleep camp, which is the first permitted building that I'm going to build on this property. And it's basically going to go right here. But before I do that, I need logs. And last week I started cutting down some trees to that end. And this week was more, I think, about learning what I need to do than it necessarily was about getting a whole lot done. I've watched a lot of YouTube channels on building homesteads and building log cabins and doing all this sort of stuff. But nothing beats real experience. And so this week was very much about that real experience. I cut down more trees because at the end of the day, I'm going to need lots and lots of trees. And obviously, I have no shortage of trees to cut. But there's a process that's involved with that that's a little bit more complicated. As you can see there, I've got one single log peeled. At least as of this intro. My plan is today to set up some systems to make that faster. Obvious systems for sure, but one of the things that I've learned in life is it's a lot easier to really understand what you want to build by doing it the hard way. That's not to say that I want to do it the hard way all of the time, and arguably sometimes I try and get past doing it the hard way and they end up making my life a whole lot more difficult. But there's so much to learn in the details here. And unfortunately, the temperature has really gone up. And it's temporary, but it made yesterday and it's going to make today a little bit on the side of miserable. I'm going to have to put the cooling vest back on today once I get to work. It's already 26 degrees, I think, and it's a little on the humid side. I can really feel it. It's unfortunate because I was getting so much done at the beginning of the week. So like I said, at the beginning of the week, I came out here and the first thing I did was to start bringing up the log that I had left on the hill behind me here. And that log was basically all trimmed up and ready to go. So it was just a matter of bringing it up the 30 or so feet up the hill. So all I needed to do was connect the winch line to an anchor point, which I started with a tree and eventually moved on to another log that's lying further away to start pulling it up. I have a drill powered winch that I bought a year and a half ago that I started to use for that. I mean, it worked, but man, was it slow. And I've known since I started this that I was going to need a capstan winch, both because as I get further along, the logs are going to get further and further away, and I only have 50 feet of line on that drill-powered winch, but also for the sake of speed. But I wasn't really expecting how slow it was going to be. It took forever. It took me about 25 minutes to pull up that one log. And then the next job was to pull down the other tree that I had felled at the end of last week that was somewhat hung up in another tree. So the first job was to pull back just to get it to drop more out of the other tree, so that way I could trim further up and not have to worry about branches and worry about it falling down as I was working on it. So once I pulled it back that 10 feet or so, I trimmed up the rest of the branches off the lower part of the tree, cut it off at about 24 feet. And then I had to maneuver it up the hill. And I think in a way that this is sort of something that's going to be useful as I go along, having two drills, because I can have the capstan set up at a permanent anchor point up here, and then I can have the smaller drill powered winch that I can use to move around the log and shift it side to side if my rigging isn't up to the task. I shimmied it around. I had to do a little bit of pushing and pulling, but then I got to the bottom of the little ridge here that I have to go up, and this goes up 3 feet. And the biggest issue here is that right now the log sort of comes up into it and it sort of pushes in, and I need to get it to lift up. So I did that with a little bit of, shall we say, elbow grease or back grease, as the case may be, and shimmied it until it got high enough, and then I could just pull it the rest of the way up. So the thing that I found that is really inconveniencing me the most is the fact that it takes a lot of time to not just winch, but the back and forth. So as I'm winching along, inevitably it gets stuck a little bit. And so then I have to stop winching, go back to the log, shimmy, move, do whatever I need to do to get it to shift from whatever it's hung up on, and then go back to the winch, do it again. And I was going back and forth quite a few times. And so that meant that I easily doubled the amount of time that I was spending winching on that one log. So over the course of that day, I really only got 2 logs moved. And given the fact that I'm going to need to move dozens, if not hundreds of logs over the course of the building that I want to do here, that's a real problem. So I've got some ideas there. Obviously, like I said, I bought the capstan, which is supposed to arrive today. And I'm going to do some other stuff to try and make it easier to move these logs around, because they're not light. I mean, the second log that I moved was easily 200 pounds, maybe 300 pounds. And when I get to the house, I'm going to be dealing with even bigger logs still that could weigh 400 or 500 pounds. And the last thing I want to do is be trying to use my own body weight to push against these things, because that's no fun, and that's definitely a way to get hurt. So once I finished getting those logs up, I spend a little bit of time cutting down a bunch more trees. Not necessarily big trees, but trees that I'm going to be able to use for all sorts of purposes. Some of them are larger diameter on the 10 to 12 inch range. Some of them were much smaller on the 3 to 4 inch range. And those smaller trees are as much that way I can fiddle around and play around with these processes a little bit before I commit, when I don't have to deal with a much larger log that's so much more work to fuss around with. So over the course of that day, I cut down another 5 or 6 trees. That's all within this relatively small area that's 30 by 60, somewhere around there. As I go along, I'm gonna keep taking trees. Like I've got one right here. I've got one right here that are on the larger side. Because one of the things I want to do as much as I can is get the logs down and ready to be processed. I'm rapidly coming to terms with the fact that for all the ideas of how quick I thought this was going to be in my head, it's going to be a lot slower and a lot more work. So I have to really lean into that and understand, okay, it's going to be more work. What do I do to make it faster? But how do I make it more comfortable? How do I plan for winter, for example? Hopefully that's another 3 months away, but if Mother Nature decides it, it could be a month and a half from now. But the more trees that I get down, I get them up and out of the way, I get sort of the process and the workflow down, so that way I understand in my mind exactly what I need to do when the weather is comfortable. It'll be so much easier when it's cold and miserable. Though I'll have to say I am definitely looking for cold and miserable well over this heat. But next week I'm going to start working on a couple of different ideas for helping to move up the logs a little bit more easily, and we'll see how that goes. So the next thing I tried to work on was getting a sense of what it's like to peel logs. And again, watched a lot of YouTube channels, but I haven't necessarily done a lot of it by hand, certainly not with the tools that I have now. So I started peeling. And I thought about for a while getting one of the chainsaw power debarkers, but the quality of those is really iffy at best. And they're also really loud and unpleasant to use. And for the most part, I'd rather be out here and not have to make too much noise, not to be that loud. If I can avoid excessive noise, all the better. One of the things that I came to notice when I was out here is I was just working basically where I'm standing right now, and suddenly there was a bunch of little birds that were bouncing around in the trees. I don't know if they were curious about me and what I was doing while I was here, but they seemed to be very focused on me, and they were checking it out and flipping between the branches. And if I was super loud using gas chainsaws, probably wouldn't get to see that and enjoy being almost part of the ecosystem here one way or another. Even though obviously in the short term I'm a little destructive to it, eventually I'm going to be putting a lot of fruit and other berry bushes out here that's going to really support that wildlife. So I wanted to start with the draw knife that I've got handy. It was a little bit rusty from having sat in a non-climate controlled space for a while. So the first thing I had to do was get it sharp. I wasn't sure how sharp it needed to be, but I figured a little sharp wasn't going to hurt. It was certainly really, really dull when I first took off the cover. And I spent a little time sharpening it, using some sandpaper just to get the bulk of the rust off, and then using a file. Actually worked pretty well. I found that the bark came off really easily from the spruce pole that I was working on, but the issue was that it was really, really unwieldy. the shape of the log wasn't perfectly straight. At the end, it had a bit of an S-curve. And because of that, it put the weight off to one side, and it kept wanting to tip over and rotate on me. And I spent most of my time just sort of fussing around with keeping the log where I wanted to be, so that way I could use the draw knife effectively. I mean, obviously I have to build some sort of a peeling station. That was a given. I knew that going in. But the whole reason I'm peeling this log is to turn it into that peeling station. So it gave me a sense of the position I want to be in, how far is too uncomfortable to bend over, how I'm using the shave and clearances and all that. So when I build the sawhorse for that peeling station later today, I have at least some idea in my mind of what the thing needs to look like, how it needs to be shaped, and that sort of stuff, so that way I can move forward with it. But overall, I spent a lot of time just sweating, shaving the thing. At the same time, I enjoyed it, and it worked well. And I've got another draw knife somewhere. I'm still looking for it. That's a curved one that I think will probably work a little bit better, especially on the small diameter logs. But in the short term, this one works fine. When I was rifling through the shed today looking for that curved draw knife, I also found a bark spud that I'm going to try after I get some other stuff put together, and just keep trying the tools that I've got that I've bought over the years, knowing that I was going to do this eventually. So the next thing I did was made a sawhorse out of the tree that I peeled a couple days ago. And I peeled it so that way I don't have to worry about the roughness of the wood, because as you accidentally rub your hand along the spruce bark, it can really tear up your skin. So I want it to be smooth, and also I want it to be able to dry out properly and not rot. Maybe next week or the week after I'll coat it with a borax solution to make sure that bugs don't get into it, and helps it to stay mold free. So that way it dries out really nicely. And those spruce logs, as they dry out, they can last for 30 years. Obviously, if they're sitting against the ground, that can be a problem. So I'll probably do some sushugiban on the bottom of that, just to seal up the pores of the wood and make it so that way it's less prone to rot. Yeah, that process was fairly straightforward. I wanted to notch the two logs so that way they would mate together and grip each other. I have a tenoning jig somewhere. I haven't found it yet. And that's probably how I'm going to want to build going forward with the narrow spruce like that, where I just create a mortise and tenon and then put either a dowel or a screw through the tenon to hold it together, because that way it's relatively fast and easy. And I'm looking for a lot of winds that don't take a lot of effort. But this took a little bit more time, creating those matching cuts, so that way I could put it together and at least have something so I can get the work off the ground and work at a comfortable height, so I'm not sort of bent over and straining myself to work at it. So having the V shape, so that way it can grab the log and keep it from rotating when I don't want it to. I probably made my life a whole lot difficult with that first log by trying to peel it all in one piece, because realistically that log is not staying in one piece. And so having to deal with rotation was a piece of suffering that was more of a lesson than it was necessary. So once I got the sawhorse built, obviously I had to test it. So I tried the same draw knife that I used to peel the log originally. I also tried the bark spud that I found in the shed earlier. What can I say? It worked. It could have been better. But for now, it's certainly better than fussing around with the log on the ground. Well, I mean, it worked. How could it not work? But it's going to fall over. I need to brace the ends so that way it doesn't rack. And it's not that I couldn't do it today. If I had the building materials, I would have, but I don't think I have it in me to scrape down another couple sections. I'm just too hot. Temperature's gonna drop in a couple days again, and then I'll be able to get back to it. But man, I hate the heat. The bark spud, I think, is going to work a lot better on the larger diameter stuff. The small diameter stuff, it's just too finicky to get it to jag in right. But also, when you're pushing in, the thing can't move, because if it moves, then it doesn't work. Whereas the draw knife, you're pulling it into yourself, and I can brace the piece and bring it into myself, and that works so much better. But it's definitely way better when I'm not having to bend over. And like, the reason that I did it underneath here, even though that doesn't really work very well, is because I wanted to make sure that on the V here I have enough bite when something of whatever diameter gets put into it. But this will be good for making small diameter stuff. I'll have to make something different for the big heavy logs. Yeah, it works. It's good. I think it would be better with the mortise and tenon though, just because then I can have more control over where things go, and they'll be fully braced in, and I can pin through the tenon, which means that it's much stronger than just relying on screws, which was never going to be a good idea. So early in my channel, I spent a lot of time building a tension gazebo truss structure. And as I've been doing this work now in the bush, I realized how misplaced that was. Not because it was necessarily a bad idea, but I'm here for the journey. I'm not here to get really quick about it. And I think part of it was the fact that I was not expecting to not react to the deer flies when I got bit. And so that was something that was really strong in my mind. But also I had so many preconceived notions of what this was going to be. And being out here and just doing the thing, spending the time with the materials, and I'm starting to realize how I want to engage with this place. And using the materials that are here just makes so much sense because it's free. It takes a little bit of time and energy to process it, for sure. But I can build almost anything with those little poles. I'm probably going to use several of those to build a little canopy over the fire pit that I want to build, so that way I have somewhere to sort of sit, relax, have some food. Having somewhere where I can come out of the bush, sit down, not get rained on, not get my truck wet, is going to be nice, just almost as a staging area, if nothing else. And then as winter comes on, it'll keep the snow off that area, and so that way I have sort of a place that I don't have to worry about moving snow as I go along. And as I'm doing this, I'm really starting to think about how much I'm going to have to plan for snow. In some ways, snow makes things a whole lot easier because you don't have to worry about things like logs really digging into the ground and getting bound up as much. Everything slides better, and it's just more fluffy and easier to deal with. That same fluffiness can become a real problem when there's 2 or 3 feet of snow on the ground and I'm having to trudge through it. Now I'm thinking about getting a snow machine and getting an extra sled and a couple of other things that I'm going to need to be able to keep building out here in the winter, but also have to be mindful of how I leave these logs, because I don't want to leave them on the ground because they can easily freeze to the ground. So I'm going to have to start lifting them up and make a stack. So I have to sort of plan around that. At some point, the snow is going to be 5 or 6 feet deep in here, and it might not be practical to do a lot of this work. When it's only a foot deep, it's great because you can walk through, there's no bugs, there's no anything to get in your way, and every step you're just immediately purchasing onto the ground, and off you go, and it's great. But once it's really deep, it becomes impractical. So when that happens, I want to have a big stockpile of materials up here, so that way I can only have to worry about getting this far, and I can build the next building over the course of the winter. or build the first building, depending on how things go. And there's just so much to do. But at the same time, I'm coming to terms with that in the best sort of way. That I had an email exchange with the building planner today, because he finally got back to me 3 weeks to the day, and asking me questions about things like timelines and, well, how am I going to build this and when I'm going to build this? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just one guy. I'm a guy in the bush that is going to do all these things eventually. I can't tell you exactly when, but that's fine. This is great. And it's, on the one hand, a little frustrating because, you know, you want to be able to make progress. You want to be able to show cool things that I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. But at the same time, I'm here to live and experience and learn. And I mean, I'll put a number on the page if he wants me to. But I mean, I have to build the sleep camp. And then once the sleep camp is built, I'm going to be building the house. And while I have to work on the house between now and then, just so that way I am putting work in on the actual house every 10 months, it's going to take me 2 or 3 years probably to build the house. And then once the house is built, it's going to take me maybe a year to build the workshops. And then it's going to take me another year to build the next thing. Or I might get some equipment and it'll go way faster. I don't know yet. But man, I'm looking forward to it. It will be nice when I'm in a position where I don't have to worry about the heat as much. Because I think, like, it really hit home when I got here today. And it's hot, and it's like, I don't want to do this. I hate this. This is awful. But it's not because of the work. It's not because the camera. It's not because of any of that. It's just because I feel like crap when it's hot. And I'm certainly better than I was earlier when I first started doing the channel. I'm a little bit more used to the heat now, but I won't necessarily be in the future. And once I have an actual building where I can go in, I can have a nice cold drink and pause for a few minutes, recharge and go back. It's just, everything is going to get better from here. Everything that I do, every day that I spend working on these buildings and collecting materials and whatever else brings those days where I am going to have all of the things that I need to make this almost always pleasant. It's just, and that's how I have to look at these less than pleasant days. It gets better from here. It's just having to keep that motivation day in and day out, so that way I can keep making progress. So that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the video. Next week, we'll just keep on keeping on. Obviously, I have to get more building materials as time goes on. I'm gonna work on seeing how to make it easier to move the logs through the woods. Hopefully within the next week, I'm gonna have the permit finished, but I had a few extra questions for the planner, just because now that I'm sort of on the ground and really working on it, I might wanna move a shed 10 feet that way or 10 feet that way. What does that mean for the permit? When it's 1,000 feet from anything else, it doesn't matter if it's a foot or 2 feet different than what I said in the permit. What if I decide to make it a little bit longer because that's what I have building materials for? Is that a big deal? But anyways, I'll probably go into a little bit more detail once I actually have the permit of what I asked for and what issues he saw. But at the same time, it feels close. None of the questions they had were necessarily, you can't do this or you shouldn't be able to do that. The only real issue that he had was being confused by the number of buildings that I have and being concerned that I'm not going to be zoning compliant because I'm going to have a business with 30 people. But I don't think that's a really big deal because I just told him the truth. I'm a guy that likes to do a lot of different things and I like to have a lot of different spaces to do them in. So like, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll see you here next week. Have a good one.